This is the 6th day of the September-October 2005 retreat in Springwater. It's so still and quiet today. Seemingly not a trace of the storm. It's amazing when the storm of emotion and thought relaxes. Waking up and looking around and touching the vast wonder. What an amazing thing when this happens. Just simply being preoccupied with stuff and not noticing. So simple, really. This movement of thought, what we call thought, to be with it just the way that it is in each one of us. For some, images are very powerful. For others, it's more visceral or maybe words. In the stillness, to be with it in a very subtle way. Not labeling, not pushing away. Just with the simplicity of the movement. David Bohm so beautifully describes what he calls the system of thought. And as I think of it, it's almost like an organism, a kind of being where thought and imagination and all of the functions of the body and emotions and feelings and tensions, moods and chemistry. It's all one whole. Moving in such an alive way. To be with thought in that wholeness of how it moves in us. How the stories are told and are felt and experienced. Humans are such great storytellers. It's been part of our society and family as long as anyone knows. We love these stories. They're so much a part of our existence. And when we read a good book and enjoy the story and are light with it, the story really is wonderful. And in us, when this movement of the whole system of thought and feeling moves through, this other amazing phenomenon happens of identification. Where a thought arises, this particular image or this particular word or idea, this is me. And some other thing is not me. And when this starts to happen, something changes. No longer a story. It starts to be felt as real. And gets very complicated. simple example that came to mind this morning was starting off with a statement. Thought is bad. And I am bad when there are thoughts. These simple statements start off a whole new story in which something else arises which we also identify with as the one who's going to stop the thoughts and do something about it. So a new identity is born, the good identity, that's going to take care of the bad identity. And it poses as awareness. Trying to get rid of the thoughts, more thoughts are born. One feels like a failure. It's really quite amazing. All starting with a simple statement that gets believed, not examined. Thoughts are bad. Part of this work of presence and inquiring is, for me, to get really interested in this. To get interested in the movement of thought and then how it starts to play itself out in identity, in beliefs and assumptions. To become sensitive to how this play, which ends up being so painful, plays itself out. In that sense of wonder and not knowing. Watching it play out in the vast field of presence. And to follow one's curiosity. For me, it sometimes goes, well, is this true? Is this me? And that Indian kind of way of not this, not this. Not out of habit, but out of real curiosity. No, this is not a real thing. It's just a story. In the moment, as these various identifications arise, and the impulse to defend them, to really be curious about what's going on. Because once it's seen that this really is not me. There's no inherent truth here. It can be let go. And then the curiosity also turns to what it is that's seeing, to presence itself. What is this? Not knowing any answer. In groups and meetings, a very powerful example of this system of identification and belief came up for lots of people. It's self-hatred. And as I've been thinking about it, it seems that this is a very powerful dynamic in our world. And the word that stands out as I look at it is hatred. Most of us are appalled when we see racial hatred lived out, crosses burning, horrible acts of violence done, hating other peoples, other countries, going to war, destroying. All starting out of assumptions about others that are so flimsy, turning to hatred. Really a very violent expression of separation. And yet when it's going on in us, it often has the face of a parental guide or a godlike figure of wisdom. This is for our own good. We're just hating the parts of us that aren't right. Helping us to reform and be better people. But it's hatred. In a meeting I had with someone at another retreat, they were able to have a glimpse of what was under the surface in the heart of the volcano, of how powerful this self-hatred was. in the moment of doing something really very minor. Hear the words that came. I should be annihilated, obliterated, erased, blotted out, incinerated, not a trace left. What amazing words and thoughts. To have towards oneself. So reminiscent of concentration camps and terrible acts of cruelty. And we may think that when self-hatred is here with us, it's not quite that violent. But it might be interesting to find out how powerful these expressions really are in us. Because it's so in our culture, it's so in our collective. It's lived out in the history of the United States and the annihilation of the buffalo. It's being lived out today. It easily finds its way into the subtleties of our inner life. Resulting in just a kind of loss of energy and a loss of heart. Some years ago when I was exploring this in my own life, I came across a quote from Cotton Mather. The minister in colonial New England. And it's a sermon, excerpt from a sermon, in which he speaks of God having a drawn bow with a mighty arrow aimed at our heart. The arrow is quivering, his hands fully on the string. And he says we deserve to be annihilated. He uses that word. But it's only the kindness of God that keeps him from letting loose. But he's growing impatient. One more transgression. The arrow will be let loose and you will receive what you deserve. What an amazing thing to tell an assembled group of people gathered in community. To me, it just shows how deep this energy moves. These thoughts and beliefs move in our culture. There's that story of involving the Dalai Lama when several teachers, I think in the early 90s, from the United States gathered to consult with him about how it's going. And one of the teachers brought up and said, one of the greatest difficulties my students have is self-hatred. And the Dalai Lama had no idea what that was. And so he said, that must be an isolated thing. And he looked around the room and everybody was vigorously shaking their heads. Yes. And at least as I heard the story, he never was able to relate to it. So it's interesting to think that perhaps another culture would not experience this in the way that we do. So what a wonderful thing to open this up when these phrases, when these words come, to really be with them, write them down, explore them, see what's beneath the smoke. Let them reveal themselves as lies. Have the possibility of not identifying as this one who deserves to be annihilated, punished, hurt for being simply what we are. As I was looking into this, I remembered a confusion that really came alive in me when I first came to meditation. And that was around getting rid of the ego. And I think at that time the stream of self-hatred was quite alive. And it got all mixed up in this quest. To get rid of this new bad thing. So when this self-hatred got wrapped up in it, it didn't give the opportunity to really see what was meant, to let it open up and reveal the painfulness of identification, not blaming, not trying to annihilate the ego, not creating a new false identity. But honestly and innocently just seeing the movement of these thoughts and beliefs and systems of painful identification. Just thoughts and stories. There's a wonderful story that Douglas Harding tells about Ramana Maharshi. in which a visitor said to him, "It must be wonderful to be completely free of ego." And he said that was just simply not true. That, quote, ego arose again and again. And then he said, but it's seen for what it is. And therefore it doesn't do any harm. The openness of presence, the vastness of being in that statement of not judging. Just a wise in-touchness with how things move, with how we are. I'm remembering a phrase that someone used in a meeting. The phrase was bemused affection. And that really rings for me. In the stillness and presence of being with all of us the way we are. Our stories and identifications and crazy little circles. In presence, the boundaries melting. Affection is just so natural. In this wonder and affection for us as we move and live and struggle and watching it, seeing it open up. In the light of this affection, it's possible for these difficult, suffering ways to just no longer have the hold and the belief. And the identification. Just stories. melting, coming and going. Just the stillness. Nothing to do, nothing to fix. Nothing to change. Let's end here.